Good evening. Welcome to Township of Scugog's Budget Open House for 2020, our operating budget. And I'd like to welcome viewers online and as well thank all of the people that showed up in our audience today. Just to give you a little bit of an agenda of what we're going to be doing, we're going to start this evening with the Region of Durham, presentation on the 2020 Region of Durham budget, and then we'll go into the Township of Scugog budget. So I would like to introduce Nancy Taylor, who is the Commissioner of Finance, and Nicole Pincombe, who's the Director of, let me get this right, Business Planning, Budgets, and Risk Management.
Good evening, Mayor Drew, members of Scugog Council, Township residents. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to present on the region's behalf the current proposed 2020 business plans and budgets for the property tax supported services provided by the region. My name is Nancy Taylor, as was mentioned, and I'm the Commissioner of Finance for the region of Durham, and I have with me Nicole, who's our Director of Budgets. Regional Council is currently deliberating on the region's budget, and the information being presented this evening reflects the impacts to an average Scugog household, and we'll talk about that as we go through the presentation. The budget has been recommended by our Finance and Administration Committee for approval to Regional Council, and that will take place this coming Wednesday, February 26th. So what we're presenting today are not the approved numbers until that takes place, but it is what's being recommended to Regional Council. Our agenda this evening, I'm going to work through what we've done with respect to public engagement efforts on the 2020 budget, talk about the current 2020 budget and pressures and priorities. I'll overview our current proposed total budgets and the impacts on an average Scugog residential home, summarize the 2020 capital budget and forecast, and highlight some of the line-by-line review activities that took place. At that point, I'll turn it over to Nicole, who will talk about some provincial funding impacts, which are quite important to note with respect to the regional budget, and highlight some of the key investments that are in the 2020 budget. And then I'll conclude our presentation with highlighting the 2020 regional property tax impacts on select types of properties within the township. And we will be here to answer any questions at the end of the township's presentation. So as part of our 2020 business planning and budget process, regional staff looked to enhance our public engagement on the 2020 budget. We did host 2 budget open houses, one at regional headquarters in Whitby on November 12th, and one at the Scugog Community Recreation Center here in Scugog on November 13th. Thank you for your hospitality and the excellent service provided by town staff. Members of the public were also encouraged to come into drop-in sessions before both of those open houses, and we had a lot of regional staff available to answer any questions within particular service areas. We also provided opportunities for residents to participate in person and online through live stream presentations, surveys, question and answer sessions, and an enhanced budget website. And our presentation as well from November was live streamed, similar to this one this evening. We're also doing our best to increase our promotion through all the social media channels, so if you want to add us as a favorite to any of the popular channels, we're happy to provide information and details. And we're continuing to expand and look at what we can do for the 2021 budget to reach more people. So to the nuts and bolts of what's happening with the regional budget, the current proposed 2020 business plans and budgets represents a net property tax budget increase of 2.42%. For an average regional property. It's actually a little bit lower for a residence in Scugog. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. It is lower than the 2.5% guideline that was approved by Regional Council back in the fall. And that 2.42% was achieved through enhancing the use of reserves and reserve funds for one-time expenditures, and looking at things like completion of a line-by-line review to try to find savings to offset budgetary impacts. Now, we mentioned a little bit that we'll talk about provincial impacts. There were increased property taxes reflected in this budget of over 0.5% related to offsetting provincial cuts through the provincial budget. And in order to maintain those crucial service levels, the regional tax levy had to step in to take place of that. So that's just over 0.5 percentage point out of that 2.42. So without that, the region would be sitting at a 1.89% budget increase. In the budget, you will see Durham Regional Police, with the inclusion of 20 new frontline officer positions, has an increase of 3.9% on their budget. The conservation authorities have achieved their target of 2.5% for the operating portion of their budget and 1.5% for special programs that they run. So this 2020 business plan and budget is ultimately an approximate increase of $5 a month on a region-wide average residential home. And again, we'll talk about specific Scugog impacts in a later slide. Our 2020 budget did focus very much on increasing frontline services to a community. That's been a very, very key issue for us for the last couple of years. So it does respond to that loss in provincial funding. It provides for base pressures and non-discretionary items required to deliver regional services. But our key budget priorities is responding to growth and affordability pressures and supporting the vulnerable sector. There's been a significant amount of issues that we're grappling with respect to homelessness, victim impacts, human trafficking, all kinds of unfortunate things happening in society today that are a key focus for us. Innovating and modernizing our operations, accommodating legislative changes, which picks up some of those provincial issues along with a few other, and of course investing in infrastructure renewal, which I know has been a key issue here at the local level in Scugog as well. So our total overall budget for 2020 is reflected on these two charts that you see. So the total expenditures in a gross amount from all sources here is $1.44 billion. And you can take a look on the left side of that slide. You can see that social services represents about 27% of that. Solid waste about 17, police 16, and bridges and roads 12.7, and so on. There is quite a dramatic increase in solid waste in this budget as a standalone issue. The region is proceeding with a long-term organics management plan we call it AD, and it's a $163 million project, so it does distort our comparisons a little bit. On the right side of the screen, you can see how that budget is funded, so all the various revenues are there. So about 48% of that comes from property taxes, and that's what residents see through their property tax bill. 21% comes from provincial funding, and that's a decrease from the past. Last year we received 25% funded from the province for the services that we provide on their behalf. So at this point they're reducing that funding for the services we provide on their behalf, and we have to make up that shortfall. So Nicole's going to talk a little bit about what those specifics are on a little bit further in the presentation. We are spending about 9% from debenture proceeds, which is a municipal way of saying debt and borrowing, and that ties in mostly to that long-term organics management project that I mentioned. And then sort of the last one of note here on this slide is we're spending now about 7.6% from reserves and reserve funds, which is savings, and that's a significant increase from last year. So we're drawing more than 20 million from reserve funds, greater than in prior years, in order to offset tax levy impacts. So I mentioned on the previous slide that about 48% of the region's revenue comes from property taxes. So that 48% then drills down to property tax bills. And so this slide here represents, for the tax-funded portion of our services, where those funds go. So the regional police, for example, is 30% of that of your tax bill from the regional share of it. Social services is about 18%, and roads and bridges 12%. One of the things as note, because I'm not sure how familiar everybody is with the services we provide, that 18% for social services, that's an increase of $3 a month as a result of provincial shifts, and that includes long-term care and services for seniors, children's services, family services, social housing, and social assistance, just to give you that context of what's included there. So the 2020 proposed regional budget is at 2.38% here in Scugog, and that's about $60 for an average single detached home. Our major capital program has a lot of interesting items coming forward as we go into the future, but for the current year we're at $289 million for our capital program. That does include that significant AD project that I mentioned, so that is causing us a little bit of a distortion in comparing with prior years. The 2021 to 2029 forecast is mentioned here, but that's just for information purposes at this point. It actually has to be approved by council each year as those years come forward. So the financing for that capital budget comes from property taxes, about 3.3%, development charges, reserves and reserve funds, which are savings that the region has, debenture, and then federal and provincial investments in infrastructure. So this capital doesn't include things like we've made submissions for some major transit capital improvements through grant opportunities, but we haven't heard yet the result of those, but the region would have to contribute about $102 million to take advantage of those grant funding opportunities for transit in particular. So those items still have to come to regional council and will be funded depending on whether we get approval for those major applications. With respect to a line-by-line review, so as part of the development of the proposed 2020 property tax budgets, we went through this process under the direction of our guidance of our CAO, and we reviewed 3 years' worth of historical actuals to identify 2020 base budget changes that we could make that wouldn't affect service levels. And so that exercise resulted in savings of about $4 million, which is 0.6 on the tax levy. So that has made a big difference in offsetting implications that we have from a regional level. And on that note, I'm going to turn things over to Nicole to talk about the provincial funding impacts.
Thanks, Nancy. So as Nancy has mentioned, provincial subsidy funding compromises approximately 21.4% of the region's total financing for the 2020 budget, and that's down from 25.4% in 2019. So that equates to about $3.6 million across key program and service areas for our region. And Regional Council, when they set their guideline for the 2020 budget, indicated to us that they wanted the tax levy to step in place of the provincial funding in order to protect the level of services and programs that are provided to the residents. So that had an impact on our levy of about 0.53%. So in addition to the provincial funding reductions, we're also seeing changes in funding models from the province, and those are be ongoing, both in 2020 and over our forecast period as well. And in addition, we're also seeing some downloading of services from the province. So that is in the areas of Provincial Offences Act, which also impacts the local revenue stream, as well as GO Transit bus service in both North and East Durham. There's still a significant amount of uncertainty with respect to the 2020 provincial funding. It's only been recently that we've gotten confirmation of our 2019 funding levels. So where we have information for 2020, we've used that, and where we don't, we've assumed 2019 funding levels for 2020, and we'll have to respond in year to any funding shortfalls that occur. And so while the province has announced in certain key areas additional funding, those are very targeted areas, and we cannot use that additional funding to offset funding decreases from the province in other areas. And as I mentioned, there's still further provincial funding reductions forecasted for 2021, 2022, and further over a 5-year forecast. So the main areas where we're seeing provincial funding reductions are in children's services, and specifically in the area of childcare expansion programs. So this was a program that was previously funded 100% by the province, and starting January 1st, 2020, it split to 80-20 funding, with the municipal sector of the region having to fund 20% of those costs. For social assistance, we saw, and this is with the Ontario Works benefits, we saw a decrease of about $0.6 million in provincial funding to that particular program. For paramedic services, we're seeing reductions of about $0.4 million in 2019. We don't have our 2020 funding allocation confirmed yet through the province, but we're assuming that we will be on target with what we received in 2019. Public health, in the area of public health, we're seeing changes to the funding methodology of public health. So previously there were some programs that were funded 100% by the province. These have now switched to 70-30, with the exception of the newly introduced seniors dental care program, which the province is funding 100%. In addition, the mandatory public health programs that were previously funded at the 75% provincial level have been reduced now to 70%, with the region picking up that additional. The region's historically invested quite a bit in the areas of public health in the region. So as such, the impacts that we're feeling for 2020 aren't as large as they are in some of the other municipalities. Our impact is about $46,000, but we anticipate as that funding formula changes, which is expected to do over 2021 and 2022, with the region having to pick up a larger share, that the impacts to the regional taxpayer will be greater in those forecast years. Sort of the one big unknown is around the social housing area. So the province has made changes to the Social Housing Services Act, which will have impacts on the regionally funded rent geared to income calculations. We're still waiting for some additional information on the province in these areas to fully cost out what the impact will be to the taxpayers. So the next few slides focus on those 4 main priority areas that Nancy introduced at the beginning of the presentation, and we're just going to walk through and I will highlight, there's a lot of information on these slides, but I'm just going to highlight a few of the key points of where the region investments are with respect to the 2020 budget and these 4 priority areas. So the first priority area is responding to growth and affordability pressures and support for the vulnerable sectors. So significant investments in this area include a $400,000 investment in funding to undertake a comprehensive master housing strategy, as well as an additional, or as part of that 400,000, there's an additional, part of that 400,000, there's 100,000 of it that is geared specifically for our Durham Region Local Housing Corporation portfolio to do some detailed work on revitalization of that portfolio. There's further $1 million investment in the budget to advance the recommendations that will be resulting from that master housing strategy in order to work towards achieving Regional Council's affordable housing targets that were set earlier this fall. We have increased investment in paramedic services with 12 new paramedics included in the budget for hire and a new 24-hour ambulance, as well as the continuation and expansion of our incidents response unit in the evenings. There's $1.5 million investment in police services for 20 new frontline officers, an additional frontline staff at our region's long-term care homes. That equates to about 8 FTEs and includes personal support workers, nurse practitioners, registered practical nurse, and recreational programmers. In addition, there's funding for a new 25-bed behavioral specialized unit at Fairview Lodge. And this is the first unit of its kind in Durham Region and the surrounding area, and it brings an enhanced level of care for individuals experiencing responsive behaviors in conjunction with dementia. In addition, the budget includes for the renovation of a new oral health clinic space, and that's for the newly launched seniors dental care program. In addition, there's transit service improvements, which include enhancements to the on-demand service in Scugog and in North Durham, and the results of the recent region study on the northern on-demand service are expected in April. The next priority from the region is around innovating and modernizing our operations and our administration. So one of the key investments in this area is around Vision Zero. So that includes improvements like automatic speed enforcement, which is rolling out and includes areas within Scugog Township, red light cameras, pavement marking initiatives, protected left-hand turn only phases at selected traffic signals, as well as the cost for the handling of fines that are associated with that as well. In addition, a focus for the region has been around implementing our corporate customer service strategy and our citizen experience transformation project, which will really enhance the way in which we deal with the public. Driving implementation of the region's climate change adaptation and mitigation plans with an investment of an increased investment of about $275,000. As well as continued investment in implementing the region's broadband strategy, including specific resources that are dedicated to this initiative, and that investment is about $120,000 in 2020. As well, there's inclusion of a new permanent tourism coordinator for North Durham with an annual impact of about $150,000. Third area of priority for the region is accommodating ongoing legislative and regulatory changes. So the biggest one in this, of course, is the changes to the provincial funding, which we've talked about. The other ones that are major impacts, which are impacting both the region and the township as well, and that is around Bill 108 and the changes to the Development Charges Act. In addition, the region is in the process of completing the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan that's been mandated by the provincial government, and this is a joint initiative through Durham Regional Police Services, our planning services, and our social services area. And the last priority area is around investing in infrastructure renewal. So the region's assets are total approximately $5.14 billion. So that requires a significant amount of investment on an annual basis to ensure that we maintain our assets in good state of repair. So some of the major investments planned for 2020 include road and structure rehabilitation and traffic management system upgrades. So this includes road rehabilitation work on Lake Ridge Drive from Regional Road 5 to about a kilometer and a half north of Chalk Road. So that's directly impacting investment in Scugog, as well as some preliminary work on Reach Street from Old Simcoe Street to Bigelow Street, and that the preliminary work is planned for 2020 with construction in 2022. And I should have mentioned with respect to Lake Ridge, that's about, in total, that's about an $8 million investment, and that is both in 2020 and 2020 in the forecast. There's also a significant amount of investment being made in telephony and supporting technology upgrades for emergency 911 systems. There's a lot of advancement in that area with respect to text to 911 and eventually planning for video as well to assist with the responses to 911 services. There's also a number of climate change initiatives that will strengthen the resiliency of our regional infrastructure and improve the environment, and these include energy efficiencies that are being implemented at various regional facilities, as well as exploring opportunities to decrease the carbon footprint of our waste management integration systems, and ongoing installations of uninterrupted power sources for traffic signals and generators. In addition, there is, under the region's community investment grant policy, there's significant investment in community organizations. One of them is very close here in Scugog, and that is with the Oak Ridges Hospice. So with the expansion of the number of beds from 5 to 8, which was a very exciting announcement, the region has increased their funding for that project as well, from $350,000 up with an additional $359,000, bringing the total investment from the region to $709,650. I'll turn it back to Nancy to conclude on the taxpayer impacts.
I'll be very quick here. This is the last slide for the region of Durham. Essentially what we wanted to reflect here was, what does that mean for actual tax bills that Scugog residents would receive? So in the top third of this slide, you see the impact on a residential property taxpayer in Scugog. So the average residential property owner in Scugog has a CVA current value assessment of about $437,000. The impact on the regional side of the bill is about a $25 impact. So there will be a $60 budgetary increase and a $35 reassessment decrease. So that nets to about $25. In the middle section, we've taken an average commercial owner in Scugog of about $500,000 current value assessment. And in that case, the property tax bill will be about $42.45, but the impact of our budget change is about a $9 increase on the regional portion of the tax bill. So it's a $99 budget increase and an actual $90 reassessment decrease on that share of the bill. And then on the bottom, you see a reflection of what an industrial Scugog owner of a property worth about a $1 million CVA. That's essentially turns into a $388 decrease in the regional portion of their bill. So there's a $276 increase on the budget side, which is what we've been talking about, but there's a reassessment decrease of about $204 and an additional tax policy decrease of about $460 based on council decisions back in 2018. So on that note, I'm going to quickly turn it over to your treasurer, and my apologies for us taking a little bit longer on the regional side of the budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nancy and Nicole. It's very informative. And although this is the Scugog budget open house, it's very important that the region is your budget as well. They're actually taking about 60% of your tax dollars. So it's important to be informed as to where your money's going. And so thank you very much for your presentation. I will like to step back a little bit. I forgot to do my introductions before I started. I'd like to acknowledge the council members that are here with us tonight. Mayor Drew, Councillor Brown, Councillor McDougall, and Councillor Guido. Thank you very much for attending tonight's session. So I'll move right into my budget presentation, which is also online from February 10th, I believe is when it was. Few minor adjustments from the budget meeting itself that are incorporated into this presentation. So an introduction and overview of our whole budget process. So our budget process starts basically in June. So it's almost a full year of staff looking at budget information, coming to assess the needs of the community, and council directives and legislative changes that are all built into this. So we present our budget timetable to council in June. We submitted and put an online budget survey for the month of September. There's a council list of items that staff receive from council as to things that are heard out in the community. We present a draft budget to council on February 10th. We're here tonight for the budget open house. And our final presentation and council approval is scheduled for March 9th of 2020. The impacts facing Scugog's operating budget include the consumer price index change from December year over year. So our inflation right now is sitting at about 2.2%. So when I brought forward the budget target in October, the CPI index at that point was about 1.9%, and that's the target that we had requested from council. However, council did give us the directive to try and come in under 1%. I'm happy to report that we were able to meet that directive, but just wanted to point out that some of the pressures that the consumer price index did rise to 2.2%. Built into this budget is a cost of living adjustment to the collective agreement to the salaries of 1.7%. Also built into this budget are the roads and infrastructure budget allocation that was pre-approved by council in November through the capital budget. And within this, we've also increased our investment in roads by over $110,000. And speaking of the increase in roads investment, we increased the roads levy this year from 1% to 3%. So the total transfer in our roads for 2020 will be over $1 million. That will go into our capital reserves to be used for capital projects. We're increasing the road patching budget by $60,000. We're increasing the culvert replacement by over $30,000. And we're increasing road sweeping for over $21,000. Additionally, the gravel resurfacing was transferred over to our capital budget, and there was $600,000 that was identified in prior year budgets that was transferred over, but we actually increased that budget as well by $125,000. So that budget currently for 2020 is $725,000. Our roads investment for 2020 is over $9 million. This is a significant increase from where we were just 5 years ago. We were sitting at $5.8 million. So it's a significant increase, and we have heard the public saying that roads are the priority, and that's where we are focusing and putting our investment in. This operating budget meets council's target of coming in under that 1%. So the net operating, which was originally 0.92%, there were a few adjustments made at council on February 10th, brought that number down to 0.87%. Of course, we have the infrastructure allocation that was pre-approved or approved through the capital budget of the 4%. So we're sitting right now on the municipal portion of the tax levy at 4.87. There are 3 staff members that are included in this budget. The first one being the public works operator. This is a conversion of a seasonal winter operator who currently works from November to April to full-time operator. And this will add additional operator for the summer crew to address the backlog of road maintenance work. Another additional staff is a parks attendant that's being requested. And this is required to maintain the level of service of our existing parks, gardens, and trails. And how we propose to do this is eliminating a contract we have right now for salting of parking lots. This individual will be working in the summer, but also be helping out with winter control. The third position we're requesting is an accounting analyst. This is to help improve our monitoring of our operating budget actuals and expenditures, oversight of our procurement process, and this should result in cost savings corporate-wide. There are additional stresses that are being put in the finance area, as the region has also mentioned with Bill 108, the changes to the DC legislation and development charge legislation, the calculation and collection. It's going to add additional work onto staff members here on how to administer that program. We have a new community benefits charge. Again, this is part of the development charge change that the provincial government is splitting out the development charges as they are right now, and we will have two separate charges, one being the DC charges and another being a new community benefit charge. Also, provincially, legislation has been coming down about asset management. I'm sure you've been hearing a lot about that lately. This is kind of an ongoing requirement that we had a requirement in July of this year to come up with asset management policy, which we completed. We have 3 more directives over the next 4 years on levels of service for our assets, having a full inventory of our assets, and how we're going to maintain them. So there's a lot of work still to be done on the asset management. Just wanted to provide the public with a financial summary of the new staff that we're requesting in this budget. And this is a slight change that was from what was presented on February 10th. Was requested by one of our council members to split out the costing of the positions by salaries and benefits instead of just showing the full staff cost. So we're just providing that information. Savings and increase in non-tax revenue. So actually, I'll go back to this slide here. So the net amount of these 3 positions to this budget is about $900. So as I mentioned, the public works operator is being offset by savings of not hiring a seasonal operator. Our parks attendant is being offset by the elimination of a contract of salting parking lots. And what's built into this budget as well is assessment growth that the township will be receiving in 2020, and those things together will help to offset the cost of these 3 positions. Additionally, staff did a line-by-line review of the budget and worked from the ground up. Similar to as the region had mentioned, they found some core service inefficiencies. We too have found them. We found it actually amounts to about 0.55% as well of the tax levy. So we reviewed our township cell phone plan. We have a new caretaking contract. One of our waste management contracts that expired, which is now saving us some funding. And we took a close look at the staff overtime. We were able to reduce that based on actuals and based on the budget software that we have implemented, that we're able to actually drill down into hours worked and such. So looking at this very detailed line review, we were able to find some savings and efficiencies. Other non-tax revenues include investment income of $110,000 and additional revenue corporately due to increase in user fees, permits, and applications of around $50,000. So the operating budget of $13.7 million is broken down by departments. And you can see by this chart here that almost 50% of the budget goes to public works, which is where our roads are focused. The next biggest area is fire and emergency services, and then recreation and culture. So this chart here, we've actually, I'm going to move ahead a little bit, showing it graphically. You can see that the large blue area is almost 50% of the pie, and that is the public works section. We'll step back to this slide now. So this is the annual increase of the total average residential tax bill. So it includes the township portion, the region portion, as well as the education portion. So this table 2 has been amended from February 10th to include the updated numbers that the region had provided, and as well as the slight change in the township budget from February 10th meeting. So I think in my February 10th meeting, that number was $91. So now it's gone down to $87. So the average residential taxpayer with a current value assessment of $437,400 would see an average increase of $87 total on their tax bill, or 1.92%, and that's for the year. Again, this is the township portion is about $1,377, and how that's broken up and how your $1,377 is broken up is identified in the pie chart here. So what I would like to point out is this pie chart does show the net budget per department. So there are some departments that actually collect revenue and some departments don't collect revenue, but this is the net impact. So this chart actually shows the blue are the expenses and the green are the revenue. So you will see that there are some areas that, although the net budget is quite small, it may be offset by revenues that come in. The distribution of your residential tax bill, as I mentioned, about 56% goes to the region, 14% to the school board, and the township keeps 30% of your taxes. Sorry, I forgot to update this slide. So it is about, it was about $1.75 per week, that increase. The tax burden by property class, as mentioned before, the township is looking to diversify or change property classes to help get the burden off the residential tax bill. So right now, our property taxes, they're about 85% of residential. The operating budget highlights, I'd like to point out here that this budget has achieved council's target increase of keeping it below 1%. We've maintained this increase, maintain and increase a level of service in some areas, in roads and parks, in our youth center, crossing guards, and summer camps. We've recognized cost savings and efficiencies, and we've included 3 new staff related to growth to mitigate risk associated with legislative changes and to maintain and enhance service levels. So all of that is built into our budget. There are boards around the room which try and break out some of these slides, are also identified here, to help explain the budget if you have any other questions. Thank you very much. That's my presentation. So I will just speak to a few housekeeping issues. If you do have questions, we are going to monitor online as well. If you do have questions in the audience here, we'd ask you to please come up to the microphone so that people online can also hear your questions. I'd also like to recognize that my counterparts and senior staff are behind me to help answer any questions you may have. So if you have any questions, if you wouldn't mind, come up to the podium, or sorry, the microphone.
Just 3 things for the region. I don't know if you'll be able to answer them, but they are important to us down the road. One, is there any consideration for amalgamating the fire departments from the whole region? Because I know our fire department is looking to buy an aerial truck or something or other. I mean, that's ridiculous because of the small community. So I'm looking to, if the region wants to amalgamate the fire departments, question 1. And do you know when the pumping station by that old mill is going to be removed or rebuilt somewhere else, because that's delaying the development at the waterfront? And a little short one. The police are still at the Bond Street courthouse because the provincial government says you've got to have police there. Well, they just check wallets and stuff like that. I don't know. But we need to change them to the same type of cheap people they use at the airport for doing that, and let's take the cost off our police services. That's my questions for the region.
So, if I may, thank you, Diane. With respect to fire services, I'll give you the region's answer, but I'm suspecting that the fire chief may have a comment as well. A number of years back, there was an initiative to go through and review whether that's something that should be consolidated together. And if I recall correctly, because I was at the local level at that point in time, it required what's called a triple majority. So it requires a whole sequence of voting requirements in order for that to happen. And at the time, it did not proceed. At this point in time, I think there's a lot of efficiencies that are underway and in play with respect to fire services and police and paramedics with respect to training opportunities and all of those kinds of joint shared services. So I think they're doing a lot to streamline and share services without having to look at it beyond that. But with respect to how the interrelationship between the fire departments themselves are, that I couldn't speak to. I don't know if you have any more to add, Mark.
Thank you. We within the region have quite a relationship with our community safety partners in the fire services, not only here in the north, but also in the south and beyond. And you speak towards the aerial truck, something, yes. Would I love an aerial truck? 100%. Could I get one tomorrow if we needed one? Yes, I could, through our mutual aid plan that we have within the region of Durham. That being said, I would dare to compare our fire department against any other in the efficiencies that we have in place right now and the cost effectiveness of delivering that type of service to the community.
With respect to the pumping station, if you can send me that information, I'd be happy to email. I'll find a business card and leave with you. If you want to email that question to me, I'd be happy to find an answer for you. And your last question was with respect to police services and how the civilians cover off certain responsibilities versus what a uniformed officer would do. Am I interpreting that question correctly? Yes. Certainly in regional headquarters, there's a lot of the members of the public that come in to get things like police checks and the like. And that, in my observation, is done by a civilian. It's not done by officers. So I think they are doing a lot of work. Over the last number of years, there has been zero increase to the uniform complement for police. So last year it was increased by about 25. This year in the budget there's about 20. So without having any uniformed officer increase for all those years, my understanding is that certainly to the most extent they could, they would have had non-uniformed people fulfill whatever roles they can. But I'm not an expert in the police budget. We can certainly, again, find any information that you might have with respect to that.
Thank you.
But I'll give you my business card before you leave, and you can email me anything you'd like.
Thank you. Now, with regards to the Scugog budget, one is the increase. Is to do with revenue, and this is from the Bagwadding or the casino. Several years ago, at a meeting at the Bagwadding Community Centre, we were assured by the Ontario government that we would not lose our percentage of the income from the casino. We were assured that. My question is, has the township, the mayor, written to Mr. Ford and asked him if we can have the money back, because the Liberal government lied to us and made us spend $40,000 to prove we're providing services, when the fact remains is that we got a piece of the action. If you have written to Mr. Ford, has he responded? If you haven't written to Mr. Ford, will somebody do so and ask for the money back?
See if our CAO can answer that question for us.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I think a matter we've discussed a couple of times, Colin. So I'd be glad to just review it again. So you're quite correct that in 2016, the Great Blue Heron came under the control and management of the OLG. And at that time, a little bit announced to the township, the agreement between the Great Blue Heron First Nations and the township ceased. And the township did at that time, through efforts of contacting our local MPP, the Premier, everyone expressed our concerns. And at the end of the day, what was resolved was, yes, a municipal service agreement. And a municipal service agreement was established between the township and OLG to provide, among many things, fire protection and road maintenance and other matters, other areas of our service that benefits the casino. And in that regard, we're in the area of about $1 million annually being contributed to the municipality. It is slightly less than they were receiving in the past, which was in the area of about 1.1 to 1.2, but it was the best situation that could be negotiated under the circumstances, I truly feel. The township is currently negotiating with the First Nations group for a similar agreement for servicing of fire protection and roads for the First Nation lands, separate and distinct from the casino. Those discussions are currently moving very positively. And the mayor and I expect to be reporting to council in the spring with respect to that. And hopefully those two, I think you'll find, actually it's moving very positive and it's confidential, I can't say much more on that, but I think you'll find that a lot of progress has been made and it'll be a satisfactory agreement with them that will put us in a good shape.
Thank you, but my point is that the Liberals lied to us over it. And secondly, with the expansion of the casino on our ad valorem agreement, we would be making more money out of it because the casino expanded.
If I could, so part of the agreement we struck with OLG is biannual review, and it does have a clause that the municipal service costs can be reviewed based on any expansion to the casino. So at this time, as you know, a hotel's being constructed. There's an expansion of the gaming floor, I think 30,000 square feet, a theater. So we're currently now evaluating those municipal costs for that increase expansion, and we'll be meeting with OLG with respect to reviewing the agreement with them. As I said, it's been 2 years we've been into the agreement, so it's open for negotiation. As soon as we have our review completed and those facilities are actually in use, then I feel we're eligible for an increase in cost to the township. And we will be pursuing that, I can assure you.
I just have a couple more. You want to spend some money on altering some part of a building here to move out of the basement. Now, if I recall back when this was built, the basement offices were designed as offices. And I don't see why we should move out of them when they were designed this way. Why do we need this expense? We've already spent $800,000 or more on buying the other part of the basement for storage. I mean, this is getting a little ridiculous, spending money on buildings like this.
I'll reply to that as well, Colin. So the space in the basement that's currently occupied by the finance department will still remain a combination of office and meeting room space. We have a shortage of meeting room space at the municipal office. So some of that space will be used for meetings. Some of it will be used for some of our summer staff who have nowhere really to do their work. And then the finance staff will move from the basement to the G1 area with some minor alterations to the space to accommodate 3 offices and some workstations. And it does provide a better work environment for our finance staff and frees up space in the basement that we desperately need for other purposes.
It just seems more space. I have one final comment. Thank you. Okay, you're putting or proposing your project in Blackstock. You're going to put $1.8 million into this. I want to be assured that you're going to hire a proper project manager to do the job, because you have failed miserably on the second ice pad, this building, the Nestlin Hall renovation with a lot of major problems there because you didn't have proper project management. You have nobody in this office capable of project management. Are you going to hire qualified project management for this project?
If you don't mind, Carol, maybe part of it I'd like to respond to, if that's okay. And then I'll let Carol Coleman, our Director of Community Services, Works and Parks, fill in any gaps that I missed, Colin. So first of all, I'd like to think, and I'd like you to think that we do have competent staff that can manage the budget. There's a new staff group here. I can't speak for the past, but I think the budget management is first and foremost on our mind. And I think you can see that through the efficiencies, cost savings that have been generated by this group over the last 3 years. Over $675,000 in savings within the budget. And we run a tight ship on the budget side, I can tell you. And we do have staff. Ms. Coleman is very experienced on managing projects. She's a professional engineer, brings with her years of experience of project management. However, we will definitely be hiring an expert to help with that review. And I do agree that something that's very important, I was going to say most important, but very important, is that that project has proper oversight to ensure that it's being built in accordance with the tender documents and that there's not over expenditures that are going to drive the budget up. It happens, but we will keep a close eye on that. We'll hire the right person. I don't know, Carol, if you want to add anything further.
I'm not talking about the budget. I'm talking about the project itself.
Yes.
My experience with 3 projects here, with watching going on, there's been no proper project, and you fired most of the people anyway, but there's no proper project management.
Yes, and appreciate that point. I can assure you that we will have proper oversight and we'll be scrutinizing change orders and any cost overruns with respect to the project.
So I wanted to know.
Good evening. A couple of quick questions for you first, if I may, Ms. Valentin. The increase in interest income,
Yes.
was that due to increased capital investment, or is that an improvement in our financial performance? And what kind of instruments are providing us that interest?
Thank you for your question. So actually, we negotiated a better interest rate from our banking partners. And basically, it's bank interest at this point in time. It's the amount of the balance that we have and the interest rates that we're getting that we negotiated with the bank.
Okay. My other question would be primarily for Mr. Lohr and probably for our regional representatives as well. We had 3 new staff come on board, 1 part-time in the summer, proposing 3 more. And the rationale is that we need these staff to position ourselves for growth. When I look at the 1993 regional plan, the regional structure is predicting growth to 2011 that we haven't yet reached. And that continues, and Director Heritage was recently on Rogers TV saying that our 5-year forecast, were you not? Somebody was. Well, it was more recent than the most recent updates to the regional information, suggesting that the development that we're looking at over 5 years might be delayed to over 10. If I look at the Ontario Ministry of Health statistics, population for this township, charming rural population, is stable. We're around 22,000, maybe a little bit above. So when we talk about needing additional staff for growth, I'm concerned that we're looking at outdated plans and not seeing the reality of a stable rural community that is not positioned to grow in the same way that the south of the region is. I'm wondering if either our regional representatives or Mr. Lohr, if you could comment on that.
If I may quickly comment from a regional perspective for growth. So the region of Durham right now is in the midst of its municipal comprehensive review. So there's a whole sequence of discussion papers that are available on the region's website. So we are in the midst of updating all of that information with respect to our growth projections and where then that would roll down to the locals. The only thing that may slow us down this year is it's a trickle down effect. So the region, the province of Ontario is also re-looking at their growth numbers. A lot of it has to do with density changes, so changes to the legislation on how intense construction and building can occur and what happens within the main urban areas across the province. So they are in the midst of updating. They've hired Hempson Consulting, I believe it is, to update the provincial growth plan numbers. Those numbers then have to roll down to the regional level, so we get an apportionment, if you will, and then the region, through its municipal comprehensive review, would be allocating that growth based on developable opportunities to the local levels. So all of that's underway in 2020. So there's a lot more information that will be available for future years' budgets with respect to growth projections. So there's a lot available on the regional website as well to take a look at what's happening with respect to the municipal comprehensive review. I think there's still some consultation touch points happening as well.
Okay. That's part of it.
I don't have the growth numbers in front of me right now, Mr. Smith, so I can't speak to the numbers, so to say. What I can tell you is that we have a large number of residential plans of subdivision in the works. We have sewer capacity for over 1,000 units of housing units. There's been a pent-up demand in Port Perry for some time, and been slowed a bit based on the market, and some of the stress tests and other things have slowed the market a bit. But I guess what I'm trying to say is what might seem to be small growth in numbers, maybe to yourself and some people, for Scugog, it's pretty healthy growth. It doesn't take much with a very lean staff complement to tip the balance, where now you're not maintaining services, you're actually providing less service. So on the three positions, and I think the treasurer had the numbers up there, we found a way to finance these with little, if any, impact on the tax levy. And if I looked at them, the roads works person, roads is number one in the township. We not only want to maintain service, we want to try to do a little bit better. And we have pretty aggressive, we're now transferring $1 million plus through the road levy towards roads. We just, through this budget, are increasing roads allocation by around 110,000 for patching, grading, ditching, and such. So that position is converting a seasonal part-time into a full-time, so that they're not only available to plow in the winter, but to do the road work in the summer at a very minimal cost. The parks position, irrespective of the growth or what I hear mostly from the public and from council members is, we've got new parks coming on and our existing parks aren't being maintained to the level that we'd like them maintained. Here's a position that actually we're saving funds in the first year, adding funds back into the budget by eliminating some contractual services that will help us maintain our parks and maybe even do a little bit, maybe even enhance the service. And the third one is definitely related to growth and legislative changes. You have changes to as the treasurer said, Development Charges Act, that work that we just don't have anyone to do. And if we give that work to someone, then they're not going to be doing other valued finance work. In addition to that, we feel that a little more oversight in the procurement area, in budget management, that we can find further savings that I think will help pay for this position and help in future reduce costs in future budgets.
At this point, I'll have to comment that I'm not fully persuaded that the growth in the community justifies the increased staff. I do recall that on February 10th, one or two councillors, I believe our clerk, was gracious enough to accept the challenge to continue to find efficiencies. And as a taxpayer, I would hope that all staff will please engage with that. On a similar line, are we investigating opportunities for volunteerism in the community as assiduously as we might? I think there are a lot of people that would like to do such things. A program for Adopt a Park was mentioned. I think there are other opportunities, for instance, the shed on Reach Street where the bell tower is currently being stored. That's in the budget for upgrades for a few $1,000s. Small project that would suit community handy people. I'm wondering if there are other opportunities, perhaps even putting these things out for a $0 bid to see if somebody would be willing to take them on and reduce our tax burden. I'll offer that as a suggestion.
Thank you for your suggestion. We do have to be cautious that anyone that we hire does have the proper paperwork, and we have to look from a liabilities perspective as well. And I know the region, we are part of the German Municipal Insurance Pool. We would have to investigate anything like that that would come forward. Volunteers are covered under our insurance if they're part of a community board, but I'm not sure how that would work as far as fixing up any of our buildings.
I would suggest a single staff member on oversight, and a bit of community spirit would go a long way to restoring a certain amount of trust in the ability of the community to come together and make this township work a little better. So again, I'll offer that for further consideration.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I just wanted to mention, if I could, that one thing I've been so impressed about since I've come to Scugog is the volunteerism in the community. The volunteers that come forward, it's the backbone of the community. And our council advisory committees are based on that volunteerism. I mean, they carry out a lot of work. Without them, yeah, we wouldn't be able to function. So I think you have in Scugog a great commitment from the community on the volunteer side, and it's shown through those council advisory committees, the Lake Scugog Enhancement Committee, all the various fundraising efforts that you see happen here on a regular basis. So we're open to anything else that would work, but I think there's a lot being done now in the community.
Thank you. I'm just going to check over with our
I'd like to take the opposing, sorry, is that better? I'd like to take the opposing view of what I just heard. I think we do need,
there you go.
is that better? Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, I think we do need the 3 jobs. Jesus. Is that better? Is that better?
You don't need to go too close. I don't
don't
think
need
it'll
to
catch
lean
you.
in. You can hear me perfect.
There you go.
Okay. And I'd like to start with the finance department job, if that's okay. And there's been a lot of talk and a lot of rhetoric about finding efficiencies, and it's been co-opted by a few members of council. And if we want to look at that, and how many staff do you currently have?
I currently have 8, including myself.
Okay, so you have 8 staff. Would you say that you're adequately staffed or understaffed, stretched a little thin? How would you describe it?
I could use some assistance for sure.
Okay,
help.
and that's based on things as they currently are, without the addition of the January 1st changes to how we collect development fees?
Correct, yes.
Okay. So we're adding additional work to what's
Yes.
already being done to an understaffed staff that's responsible for not only saving us money, but also making sure that development fees are collected. and I don't understand why it's even up for discussion, that we're not taking on this job. Population increase or decrease has absolutely zero to do with current level requirements and the fact that they're increasing, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so we're talking about population really doesn't have any relevance here.
Well, I guess the part that was brought up had to do with growth. So the other positions could be related to growth. They are related to growth. We are paying for this through growth, through our changes in growth numbers, but we are behind in what the public expects for us to maintain our roads and our parks.
Okay.
So
Okay. Okay. So if we were to address going forward with additional work by your department, your staff, are they eligible for overtime?
the union staff, yes.
Yes. Yes. So as an efficiency, you found ways to decrease overtime.
Yes.
Yes. So the additional work, if we don't hire somebody, either has to go through someone that's doing it through overtime or someone like yourself that probably isn't eligible for overtime.
Right.
Correct?
Yes.
So a lion's share of the work might fall on you.
It could. It probably
Right.
does.
Probably does. You're probably already overworked. So I don't see the logic in taking the risk of not being able to keep up with development fees being collected. There's significant change there. There's also the point of, oh, it was development fees, and then it was,
Asset management.
yeah, and then the asset management, but it was also about,
Procurement.
yes, procurement. So recently we got changes. We're getting the road on Island Road, not Island Road,
I think
Portview. And that we got 8 different quotes,
Right.
and they range from 185,000 to 469,000, I think.
Yes.
So we can't really afford to fall behind on making sure that's done correctly either,
Right.
correct? Right, because there's a lot of work that goes into that. So we don't want to be in a situation where we're having to pick and choose what we focus on and what falls behind. Would that be accurate?
Yes.
Okay, I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Hello.
I'm going to be short. Just to the region, being a big picture person, and I know the question may be filtered by, I hope I'm not comparing apples to oranges, but how are we doing with, comparatively speaking, with taxation, residential taxes in particular, when we compare it to other regions which have possible socio-economic similar profiles? How are we doing?
So, if I may, there was a report on last week's Finance Administration Committee, which is the committee that I report to, that had a lot of information in it around comparison of relative taxation. And with respect to residential, we shake up fairly consistently. What happens here is that our assessed values are lower than the heavily urbanized areas, so our tax rate has to be higher to offset that to collect the same amount of money. So when you compare like properties to like properties across, we are quite comparable across. So we are not particularly more expensive. The one thing that your treasurer alluded to was our mix of residential versus non-residential. One of the things that has happened dramatically over the last number of years is the amount of non-residential has shrunk, and that means more costs come on to the residential taxpayer. That hasn't happened to the same degree in some of our comparators. They have managed to maintain or not lose as much of their non-residential, so that gives a little bit more relief to their residential taxpayers. But there is a report that's on the regional website that I'm happy to email you that does go into quite a bit more detail of how we're comparing with respect to all the different property classes.
Oh, thank you for that. And moving to the local level of government, previous presentations had comparative analysis in terms of the increase on the residential, say, tax basis as it relates to the other municipalities in the region. Am I missing something here? Is it on the website? I don't see that comparative.
I did not have the comparative slide this year. Most of the other municipalities are still working through their budgets as well. I have a few comparatives, and we are similar. I believe Uxbridge had approved their local level budget at about 4.58. Ajax has not approved their budget yet, but their proposed is about 4.95. So the ones that I did look at, and I believe Whitby was over 4% as well at the local level. So we are in line with those. I didn't have the exact numbers to actually put up a slide.
Okay. So that could be coming for public information.
It's a little bit difficult to get that local level information. I was trying to get the information, and they do, some do put the local level breakdown and some just group it all together. So it's a bit of a challenge. It was a challenge when I was looking at it.
And another thing that from a learning-centered and inquiry-based perspective would be helpful in terms of also of concern about increase in costs of governance, right? Mm-hmm. If you look at your presentation, you have an operating budget by department. Mm-hmm. It would help if you had historical comparatives in there from the previous, say, 5-10 years to see what has been happening historically in terms of where we are now.
So in my budget document that's online, I do show the budget over budget change. So there is 2019 budget in there. As well online, there are several years of budgets that are posted on our website. What happened in 2016, I believe, is there is a restructure within the township. So it would be very difficult to show that comparative because the departments had changed considerably from that point.
Okay.
But all the other information is online on our website.
Right, but there are a lot of people that are not into that devil in the detail. And I would just put forward as a suggestion from an information in helping educate the public that when you have this type of slide, mm-hmm. if you could have a comparative in your public presentations, say, and also to council so that they can, speak to the concerns that are coming forward with respect to costs of governance in a smaller community. And why is that so? Okay. And lastly, litigation costs, consultant costs. Mm-hmm. Where are they in terms of how much are we expending? And in terms of litigation, how do we budget in case of worst case scenarios?
Well, we don't necessarily budget worst case scenario because it's unknown. We try and budget for what we know and looking at past year actuals. So we do look at 3-year historical trends. We do bring forward if we know of something that is on the forefront that we have to deal with. We could budget for that, but we wouldn't put in an exorbitant amount. We wouldn't sway the budget for that.
In other words, we'd have to deal with it.
Correct.
And when it comes down, right? Okay. It would be also helpful too, in terms of that question, is how we can access the costs relating to litigation, and again, historical comparatives as well as consultant costs going forward.
Well, our financial statements are also posted online, so all of that information is in the
there.
Financial statements. And we also do post operating results 3 times a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any other questions from the audience? Are there any questions that we have online?
I just want to also say that we had 22 people watching on our live feed, so that was pretty good. Was up and down, but I think the most we had was 22. So we did have some email questions in. One of them was, why did you split operating and capital budgets?
So as you noticed from the presentation today, the region's budget is actually together, the operating and the capital. We do split ours with the township at the local level. We bring forward our capital budget earlier to try and take advantage of tender prices at early in the year, to try and kind of get out of the gates early to see if we can take advantage of some of the lower tender prices. As was mentioned today, and you'll see in our reports that go to council when they are tendered out, there is a wide range of prices that come in for various projects. So looking to get out of the gate early to take advantage of some of the openings that these contractors have. So we do try and bring that forward early in prior year. So we brought it forward in November this year. It also helps with staff work plans so that they can prepare what's going to happen in the following year.
I should have introduced myself. I'm Terry Barton, Manager of Finance. So we've been monitoring the emails that have been coming in. The next one is, what if at year end all the money is not spent? I guess they're meaning at the end of the budget year.
Right. So we are still working on our year-end actuals, and what happens with any surplus, it's through our reserve and reserve fund policy that the surplus is split and it goes into the various capital reserves. So it's not lost money, it's actually going to a place where we will then use it for capital projects.
So another one that came through was, how was the $725,000 spent that was given to Scugog by the province?
The
I think that was
modernization
from last
grant?
year. I think that's
I
all they
believe
said.
that must be the modernization
Yeah,
grant.
I believe so.
So we did have three projects. I'll pass it over to our clerk.
Thank you. The money was spent on, well, not spent, all spent at this time, but there was a Gradle purchase for the Public Works Department, new municipal customer service tracking software, and a Public Works radio system were the projects that were identified and approved.
Okay. I'll actually go back to one of our directors of development services would like to speak to the question on growth.
Thanks, Diane. I just wanted to provide a further comment on the issue of growth that was raised earlier by Mr. Smith. I just wanted to advise everybody, and I guess they can see throughout Port Perry, there are a number of areas where developers are actually breaking ground at this point in time. Ribcor down in Prince Albert is servicing their lands. That proposal's for 124 units. That's draft approved. Canterbury Common and Geranium is the builder that's building 99 units in the northern part of Port Perry. Cockers Creek is under construction. Their first phase is almost completed, and they're going to be moving into a second phase for an additional 66 units. And Stockworth, the developer that's located south of Canadian Tire on the east side of Simcoe Street, has a proposal in and has broken ground and is moving dirt around and will be building shortly. The proposals for 248 condominium apartment units. So we're seeing a lot of activity at this point in time. In addition to that, we also have a number of proposals in where they haven't broken ground and they haven't received final approvals yet. Another example of that would be the former Jeffrey Farm down in Prince Albert, and that proposal's for over 300 units. So we will be seeing growth in the short term and the medium term within Port Perry.
Thank you, Director.
Okay, one that just came in was, wouldn't it be a better idea to budget money to improve all of our local roads first, then to budget monies to lure tourists coming here who don't pay taxes here anyway?
That is a great question, and I know the focus has been on roads in our community, but we are a community, and we do have other areas of focus that in order to keep us as a community, we can't put all of our funds towards one purpose. I don't know if anyone else wants to speak to that. CEO. Director Coleman.
Thank you. We don't have sufficient funds to do all of our local roads. We just completed our state of the infrastructure study, and we need $190 million to do all the work that is needed for our roads. So it's a very large gap. As you can see from this budget, we are directing quite a bit towards the roads. So over the last 5 years, we've increased the spending from roads from, was it 5.7 million to 9.1. So we increased it quite significantly because that is an area that needs to be addressed. But that being said, that to have a complete community, we don't want to spend every dollar we have on roads. If we did that, there would be a lot of other issues that the residents would complain about. So we need to spend a certain portion of the budget on other things like tourism, because that's a big driver in Scugog.
We want to keep people in our community, coming to our community, and not just driving through our community.
We did had some other questions, but I know we don't have the answers here right now, so we'll be emailing out the people that have requested some of those questions. I just don't have, I know we don't have the answers right in front of us, so I don't want to read out some of those. But I think that's it, unless anyone else has.
Does anyone have any other questions in the audience? I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight and for viewing us online. It's an important process for us to go through this budget. It's your budget. We want to educate you on how we're spending your tax dollars. They are important to you. They are important to us. So I want to thank all of the members of council that came today, staff, and members from the community. If you have any questions, we do have an email, budget@scugog.ca, and we will try and answer any other questions that come in online as well.